Oh, hi. I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. I got one of those awful spring colds that just kind of keeps hanging on, and so at least it gave me some time to read the new IPCC report. Of course, you've probably seen all the scary headlines about it. But first of all, I wanted to say that this report is actually a summary for policymakers of a report that's not written or released yet. And also, the way that this summary for policymakers was put together is by having a group of political delegates sit in a room and approve it line by line. They actually project it on the wall, and line by line, with a green highlighter, they go through and approve every single line of it. So this is not a scientific document. This is a political document. And as part of the propaganda surrounding this summary for policymakers, you've probably seen a lot of stuff about keep 1.5 alive. Now this 1.5 thing relates back to a report from 2018 where the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was asked to issue a special report because the previous Paris target had been a 2 degrees Celsius target from which they wanted countries to keep their emissions below a level that would ultimately cause a 2-degree rise in temperature. But in 2018, this special report was issued saying, oh, well, what would happen in terms of what if we reached 1.5 degrees Celsius in temperature rise? What would the consequences be? Well, I don't know why they're going back to 2018 when we have a more recent IPCC AR6 Working Group 1 report from August of 2021. Now, in the earlier report, the SR 1.5 it's known as, they used what's called RCP 8.5 as the basis for their calculations and scenarios. This is an implausible scenario. We wrote a rebuttal report at the time called Faulty Premises Equal Poor Public Policy on Climate Change. And one of the highlights of the report was pointing out that this RCP 8.5 is not the scenario that should be used for making public policy. But here in this report, they've gone back and combined some of this earlier work. Now, the reason why the AR6 report of the summer of 2021 is so important is that the IPCC Working Group 1, that's the physical sciences group, that's the only group that really anyone has to be concerned about because they're actually talking about real evidence-based science. They had considerably dialed back their predictions. They had stopped using, or virtually stopped using, RCP 8.5 as the scenario baseline, and they really didn't foresee any crisis. In fact, in the IPCC AR6 Working Group 1 report of August 2021, they only refer to the words climate emergency and climate crisis once each, and in reference to media coverage. You'd think if the physical sciences thought that there was a real crisis, it would be in every page, but it's not. So, in this report, they even have a very special, scary graph, which I'm sure you've seen it, and it's in bright red. This is, of course, a black and white printout. But you can see that, you see all the boomers are going to die off in the good times. All the boomers have lived through the good times. They're going to die off. And then our children and grandchildren will be burnt to a crisp. But there's no evidence supporting that. This is all based on climate modeling, which are computer simulations, and the outcome is really determined by what's input. Garbage in, garbage out. But, in a way, it's probably good that I was sick this past week, because I had the time to read through this and do some research and come up with some of the things I just told you about. And B, I realized that they're constantly anthropomorphizing climate change, right? So we always see this little globe, with, the Earth's got a fever, we're all gonna die, right? Well, I kept thinking, what about this 1.5? Why is that so important to everybody? And I realized as I was ill this week that probably one of the reasons they went for this lower temperature is that what happens when your temperature goes up? What happens when your child's temperature goes up to a very high degree? See, it says high. This is like when you should probably hit the emergency, right? So that's probably why they came up with the 1.5 degrees Celsius. It was a more personal way, if you like, human way of understanding the risks of the Earth having a fever. But in fact, it's total nonsense. If you watch our special event with Dr. Guus Berkhout of the Clintel group out of Holland, you'll find that he did sort of a global survey of temperatures, and he found that, I think it's in the winter season, there's a temperature differential in the Earth of about 84 degrees Celsius as you go from top to bottom of the Earth and around. And if you go around the latitude, it's about a 44 degree differential in temperature. So, every place on the planet has an extremely different temperature than what these guys are chattering about with their 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius change. I mean, especially here in Calgary, when there's a Chinook wind that blows in, you can see a 30-degree temperature change in the space of a few hours. You can see centimeters of snow vanish and turn into spring in the middle of winter just because of the Chinook phenomenon. And that's a perfectly natural event. So really, all the hysteria about this report is misplaced. And I think it's really a crime that we're scaring children to death. We're making children hate their elders and ancestors because a lot of kids feel, as Greta said, "You've stolen my future."
How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood.
Well, that's just not true. I would say that there are a number of influential characters in the world, particularly the people who belong to the World Economic Forum. They have stolen your future because they have engaged in doing all kinds of schemes, carbon trading schemes, that have wasted trillions of dollars and that have now put, in my opinion, many of the banks across the world in a state of crisis. In fact, Credit Suisse pretty much collapsed, so another bank in Switzerland took it over. But there's now a risk that Deutsche Bank will collapse. And it's important to recognize that Deutsche Bank was advocating for an eco-dictatorship, that they could persuade you to support them is to form an eco-dictatorship and force you to comply. So, that's the problem now. We're up against a kind of climate tyranny that's in part led by a broken financial system and complicated by the COVID lockdowns, complicated by the conflict in Ukraine, and complicated also by the fact that, China has a plan to dominate the world by 2049. And what are all these banks and climate activists pushing for? Net zero 2050. Every policy, every climate policy benefits China. It doesn't benefit the West and certainly not Canada. So I think before we make any big moves on climate policy in Canada and in other places in the West, we should step back for a moment and look at the fact that we've been misled by all kinds of climate hysteria using very sophisticated propaganda techniques to try and con you into compliance, and that there are actors out there who actually want to force you into compliance. And maybe that's not a good path to take. Anyway, I think I better have a bit more tea here and see if I can recover my voice, do a few more videos for you. I hope you enjoyed this explainer. You know, if you can, we'd love to have you join us. You can do that on our main website. If you like the work and the insights that we offer, please offer us a donation, small or big. We're very happy to accept e-transfers at contact@friendsofscience.org. And you can make a larger donation either on our website or you can phone into the office if you don't want to use your card over the internet. And you know what? If you could just share our material, that would be helpful too. Share it with everyone. And calm down, you know, and keep calming people down. Because there was actually a really good phrase that Hans Rosling came up with in his book Factfulness. And he said, you know, fear plus urgency leads to stupid, drastic decisions. So if we're making public policy decisions, very expensive ones, based on, you know, a 1.5 climate clock countdown, time bomb thinking, we're going to be making bad decisions. And we're not going to be saving the planet. And we're going to be indebting our children for generations to come. Those are my thoughts for the morning. Have a good day. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.